President Kyakola Museveni Robert Bobi tuli South Africa naye kyali mu kukola Eno Kyakola Museveni nkoko baana waliddamu n'alinye South Africa aliba mwana wa mwana ali eno ayogedde oluzungu n'alumalayo obwino yenna avuddeyo obujulizi bwonna buvuddeyo Eno Museveni empale zikankanye ono n'agenze kukwatibwa kati we butuuse kubanga Kyakola ate guno omulundi gwafulumye ate mulalamu agenze ng'alina ekiruubirirwa kyakulaba nga Eno Museveni bamukababwa bateeke mu kkooti y'ensi yonna avunaanibwe emisango emirene era aweebwa ekibonerezo kiri gaggadde. Kale katufune President Kyakola Museveni Robert Bobi Wine ngali South Africa eno Newsroom Africa ye telefina ye South Africa gyakoleddeko interview enkambwe era yewunyisiza ensi yonna abantu bonna ne bagamba bula Kyakola musajja muzibu musajja wanjawulo musajja Katonda amuleta nga alina ensonga. Let's
get into this discussion. So, musician and activist turned politician, Mr. Robert Kyakola Museveni, also known as Bobi Wine, in 2017 became the youngest opposition leader in Uganda to run against long-standing President Yoweri Museveni. Wine has had numerous run-ins with authorities over the years, largely seen as efforts to deter him from running for presidency. Today, he remains the leader of the official opposition, an advocate for human rights and a fierce critic of the Ugandan government. Through his partnership with the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom, Wine examines how the youth vote is changing African politics as well as women's participation in public leadership. He joins us in studio this morning. Mr. Sentamu, a good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning, Naledi, and thank you for having me.
What brings you to South Africa?
Passion. But precisely, I'm here in South Africa thanks to the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom for a range of reasons. First, we are going to screen our documentary film, Bobi Wine, the People's President, and to our people here, the Ugandan community living here, and our friends and partners here. We also intend to use the same platform to highlight human rights violations. Every year we have a human rights accountability conference, which we definitely cannot hold in Uganda because of obvious reasons. The last time we held it in Kenya, and we took opportunity, again thanks to the FNF Foundation, to have human rights violations and witnesses and testimonies here in South Africa. But also we hope to use this opportunity to interact with thousands of Ugandans living and working in South Africa.
If we can talk a little bit about your story, you've got a very interesting story. In that I think that when certainly Africans think about what young voters tend to lean towards, your name certainly comes up. I mean, you grew into certainly a leader in Uganda that is followed by so many. Firstly, as a musician, and I think of the song "We Are Fighting for Freedom," certainly a song that grabbed many Ugandans. What was it, if we start at the very beginning of your political career, that said, I can be a musician that also wants to run for office?
It wasn't in my plans initially. I had wanted to be a musician. It's more fun, it's more comfortable, it's more enjoyable and less problematic to be a musician. And indeed, I was a musician for a long time, one of the most successful ones in Eastern Africa. But looking at the situation around me and the people that helped me rise to the top, I couldn't keep quiet when things were going that way. So I came into politics not to be the president per se, but to inspire masses of young people to see what must be seen so that they can do what must be done.
Yeah. It was, of course, in 2016 when you decided to run for office.
Mm-hmm.
And you've had the worst run-ins with the officials of Uganda. Talk to us about some of the worst experiences in and out of prison you've been as well.
Well, I kind of expected rough run-ins, but not to the extent that it came to, because ever since I came into politics in Uganda, it came with a mass of young people. It was a mass awakening. It was a mass falling under involvement of young people. Of course, that came with a massive crackdown our generation and the movement that I and my friends inspired was the biggest threat to General Museveni's now 38-year hold on to power. And he responded with a massive crackdown, with brutality, with extrajudicial killings, abductions, and of course imprisonment and torture for myself. I don't look at my plight in isolation of the rest, because if anything, I've been the luckiest. I've gone to prison, but I've been able to come back. I've been tortured, but I've not lost an eye or a limb. Most of my friends don't have either teeth or eyes. Many of them were taken away, never to be seen again. So it has been a crackdown on not just me, but on a generation, on an idea, on the young people, because that was the only way to respond to us effectively. Yeah,
it was in 2017 as you were running for those elections, of course. And if we really just zone in on just how much you've been through with the run-ins with the officials, you take us back to campaigning in Luka district.
Yeah, before Luka district.
The arrest, and then going back to Luka district.
Yeah, sure. Like I said, it didn't begin in Luka district. I survived an assassination where my driver was shot, and that was 2018. I was taken to military detention, tortured badly, many of my friends killed. But again, that only emboldened me. And in 2021, I ran against General Museveni. During the campaign itself, I was arrested in Luka district, prompting massive demonstrations and protests. In that time alone, in 2 days, 18th and 19th of November 2020, just a month to the elections, there was a massacre where more than 150 people were killed, including women, children, and the elderly. Although the regime in Uganda only admitted to murdering 54, but hundreds were killed. We did not stop, but neither did they stop. Abductions continued to the present day. So it has been an ongoing effort by us to free ourselves, but also by them to stop us from breaking the chains.
Part of the thing that I suppose emboldened you in your wanting to run for office was watching how the government of Uganda in 2017 sought to reform the constitution to allow for President Museveni to continue leading the country and capping, there was of course a cap on the age limit. Take us back to that, because many South Africans may not know exactly what took place and what the leader that is President Museveni would have done to extend his term of office.
Yeah, it would be more helpful for the people of South Africa and Africa to understand that General Museveni took power in 1986 when I was only 4 years old, and he has been in power since then. Having said, and notably so, that the problem of Africa in general and Uganda in particular are the leaders that overstand power, but he has been extending his hold on to power. Yes, we had a constitution, but it was first amended forcefully by him in 2005, removing term limits. We initially had term limits, but when he had, outlived all his terms, he changed the constitution in 2005. So when time came and he was held back by age, that was in 2018, again, he, using the military, of course, raided the parliament. You must have noticed the world saw with surprise and shock a fight that ensued in the parliament when the military raided the parliament. Ultimately, forcefully again, the constitution was changed to allow General Museveni to rule forever. That is exactly what prompted me to challenge this guy, because to challenge him now, we needed a protest vote, and that could only come from the young people. It should be noted that Uganda is the second youngest country in the world, with more than 85% under the age of 35. We have a country where more than 85% have never seen another president. Well, I was 4 years when he came in, so I can also claim I've never seen another president. That is how it has been in Uganda. So that pushed me to challenge the guy, and indeed, we challenged him, and the world knows that we defeated General Museveni, although he held on to power by force.
it's interesting because you talk about, running for that election where the president of Uganda essentially said, well, I'm going to stay in power and will reform the constitution to allow me to do so. Let's talk about free and fair elections in Uganda. Where do you rate elections in Uganda?
In Uganda, we don't have elections. We have rituals, because we cannot claim it's an election where the main opposition challenger, where the main challenger is arrested on the nomination date, where the main challenging party is not allowed to organize or to move around the country. We had what we call the election in a full blackout. The internet was switched off, or radios and TVs were switched off. International observers, notably the European Union and United States observers, were blocked from entering the country. We went into an election where all of my campaign team was rounded up on an island and detained. Many of them remained in prison on the present day. So we cannot say we had an election. We had a ritual, but whatever it is, we challenge Eno Museveni, and that messed up election, still, he could not win the election. They could not count the votes. They just came up with numbers wherever they got them from and announced a winner.
It's interesting. You arrive in South Africa at a time when we've just come out of an election.
Yeah.
We're busy forming the 7th administration of our country. What do you observe about South Africa's democracy?
Wow. Clearly, South Africa is not where it wants to be, but it's definitely where many of us desire to at least reach. Here, people are voting issues. Back then, we are looking for a vote. We are looking for a voice. We are struggling for our vote to matter. So there are different things. Of course, we know that many people take for granted what they have. If I was in South Africa, I would be super glad. The young people in South Africa sometimes take it for granted that they don't even go out to vote. Young people in Uganda are struggling for the opportunity to vote and to have their voice count. So South Africa, with its challenges, is definitely where many of African countries, and particularly in Uganda, desire to be.
We say a lot of the time on the continent, and you say Uganda is one of the youngest, the second youngest country in the world. We say a lot about the continent, that the continent is incredibly young, that the population of this continent is young and growing and wanting to see change. And yet there is a sense that there are bottlenecks to addressing the issues that young Africans have, and certainly them being able to see some sort of change that they're able to affect on their own lives on the continent. Is there a sense that young people can actually have some sort of a voice, power over the political landscape on the continent? Tomorrow South Africa celebrates Youth Day, where in 1976 young people were able to really raise the alarm to the world about the injustice that was apartheid. And as we celebrated, we talk about, well, where is that voice today? Where do you place how powerful, if at all, young Africans are in influencing their own political landscape?
Well, it is not just a sense that young people in Africa can influence the political landscape. It is a fact that young people can and indeed should influence the political landscape. They have to, because they cannot let the elders today, whose future is already behind them, determine their future. It is unfortunate to see that Africa is largely governed by elderly people making plans for young people. And I think it should be a clarion call all over Africa for young people to get actively involved in the politics of their countries, because they indeed can. Historically in Africa, all the change that has been inspired and achieved has been done in youthful times. Look at the days of Mandela. These were young people, and it's in their youthful times that they made the biggest contribution to Africa. So we must look back in history and get inspired. The young people have everything they need, particularly the young people in South Africa. You cannot claim, not to have reason to get involved in your political landscape. We in Uganda are desiring, if we had what the young people in South Africa had, maybe we would even influence more. So I want on this program to encourage the young people of South Africa and in all other democracies in Africa not to take for granted the opportunity that they have.
Yeah. I think one of the exciting things about being young in this era is that access to information is so important. And one thing that South Africans have is, I mean, a lot of people will say, well, we voice our issues out on Twitter. You know, we have such a loud voice on social media. I want to talk about whether or not that is the same in Uganda. I mean, we've seen multiple times where the internet has been cut off and connectivity, communication, platforms where young people are able to raise their voices become an issue.
It's definitely useful, and it's the same everywhere, not only Africa, but all over the world. At least we have space on social media, largely safe. Of course, in Uganda, it's a different story because it's because of the engagement on social media that Facebook is banned in Uganda now. It's because of the engagement of young people on social media that we have a new law called Computer Misuse Act in Uganda. It's because of the engagement on social media that so many bloggers have had to run out of the country because of persecution. But also, it's because of that social media that Africa has united, and everything that happens in any part of Africa and the world happens as if in real time. But again, we must take it a notch higher from social media to practicality, especially in spaces like here, where it is safe. It is safe for young people to come out and engage politically. It's safe for young people to come out there and campaign for the policies and systems and ideas that they believe in. So they should engage more. I mean, if people in Uganda, young people like, I would like to refer to myself as a young person, even though I'm not that young, if we risk to engage with all those consequences in Uganda, then it should be encouraged for all other young people to take it a notch higher than social media.
Yeah, you know, in South Africa, what we have, Mr. Sentamu, is a constitution that essentially says that the rights of all are respected. And we protect some of the most vulnerable, but we also protect the LGBTIQ community. It's difficult to speak to a leader of Uganda and not raise that, because to much of the world, Uganda is looked at as the country that has said, we will throw you in prison for being gay. Where do you position yourself in that discussion?
There comes the LGBT question again. I wish all other rights got the same attention as given to that. However, I'll also mention that coming from Uganda and living in Uganda, I hesitate to give so much comment on that because there's a law now, which law, besides making it illegal, goes for anybody that is perceived, you know, so that is perceived to be kind or whatever. So it's important to also mention for me that in Uganda, the LGBT question is not only a social or moral question, but it's also a political issue, effectively used by General Museveni's regime. So you will understand if I don't comment further on that issue.
Yeah. You say that it's, and just we don't necessarily need to go into it if you can't go into it, but you say that it's a political tool. Yeah. How has it been used?
Well, it was first brought up in 2014 by the regime, and it's brought up again, and it's what General Museveni throws up again, throws around again. If he's not throwing out the foreign agent question, claiming that, oh, the opposition in Uganda is sponsored by foreigners. They say, oh, the opposition in Uganda is sponsored by LGBT, etc., etc. So they hope to frame a law and then find a way of squeezing its opponents in that law. I have, however, mentioned constantly that we are firm believers in human rights for all Ugandans from all walks of life.
Let's talk a little bit about how your story has been told across the world, though. Documentaries. I mean, National Geographic did a documentary on your rise and certainly how you have found your way into the hearts of so many Ugandans. What has that been like, and has that assisted your plight in your own country?
Well, it is not just my story. It's a Ugandan story. I'm just a representative of that story. This is a story that began long before I was born. It's a story of a struggle that started long before I was born. It's an ongoing story. My generation, we are just desiring to accomplish that dream that was started by our forebearers. So it's a story of a nation trying to free itself from oppression. It's a story of a generation of young people that are rising to the occasion and saying, no, where we are is not who we are. We deserve better and we can achieve better. It's a story of people oppressed by gun rule for 38 years, but they refuse to give up. We refuse to surrender to slavery in our own country. It is, you can only compare our story to the story of the comrades that struggled during apartheid. We are facing the same situation. It's only unfortunate that, you know, the revolutionaries of yesterday, the freedom fighters of yesterday, have turned into the oppressors of today. My brother Mosi Maimani used to have a line, and I agree with him, that now we are struggling to free ourselves, to liberate ourselves from the liberators of yesterday.
Why do you think that is? I mean, if that is the line of thinking, that liberation movements, as you say, and as you say, Musi Maimani says as well, you know, I suppose don't hold the favor of the people for too long. Why do you think that is? Well,
power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts, absolutely. General Museveni, who rules over our country today, you know, diagnosed the problem in 1986 and said, Africa's problem are the leaders that overstay in power. Even Chinua Achebe, a great Nigerian writer, is quoted to have said in the 80s that Africa's problems are not the rivers or lakes or natural resources, but it's all rounding around leadership. And we cannot reinvent the wheel. It is the same answer to the question. We have a challenge that power has corrupted our leaders, that they believe that only them can deliver the promise. And the promise has been altered. Initially, when they came to power, they were promising democracy, they were promising a fundamental change, they were promising the return to the rule of law, they were promising respect for human rights. But today, they are the shadow of their former selves. They don't want to remember who they were when they were our age. So that's why we are taking it upon ourselves to shape up a country and a continent where we shall grow old, where our children will not hold us accountable for folding our hands as the nation and continent goes to the dogs.
Yes. I think in this country we talk a lot about how we need to encourage South Africans to travel more outside of our own borders, to see more of the continent, to get a context of really where we are as part of this continent. And I think that it's important to note that if you have traveled to Kampala, which I have many, many times, what I have seen is the visibility of guns all the time. And I want to note that because I think that says something about where you are as a country when you enter a building and there's an AK-47 at the door.
Yeah.
I mean, explain what that is. What kind of state is that?
It's a state of fear. It's a state of deceitfulness. Interestingly, most leaders in Africa, especially our own General Museveni, claims that they brought peace. But the kind of peace where you have to see an AK-47 at every turn is not peace, as we have been told that peace is not just the absence of war, but presence of justice and dignity for everybody. We cannot be at peace when we are not free. So those guns are keeping people oppressed. Those guns are meant to intimidate people. I'm very glad that you mentioned that people in South Africa should take a walk around Africa. They'll learn two things among others. One, that they are Africans. And that will teach them to be friendly to other Africans, especially those that were friendly to them during the struggle against apartheid. And secondly, they will learn not to take for granted what they have, because it is not very far away from extinction.
I'm out of time, unfortunately. In just a few moments, the National Council of Provinces will be appointing their leadership. Yesterday, the National Assembly appointed the leadership of the legislative arm of our state. Very soon we'll be talking about cabinet leaders as we form another government, the 7th administration. Some have called this election for South Africa pivotal. They've said this is tantamount to the 1994 of South Africa, when essentially South Africans got the vote. Your message to South Africans as we celebrate Youth Day tomorrow, as we form this new administration, and as an African?
Please ask the question again.
Yeah, what is your message to South Africans as we form this new administration?
Well, first I want to congratulate them for having gone through an election, whichever way it went. You know, at least in South Africa, the people choose. Whatever they choose, I hope it works for them. But again, I want to remind them not to take it for granted.
Yeah.
But most importantly, to the young people of South Africa, as they celebrate the Day of the Youth tomorrow, to know that everything is happening today because of the decisions and choices that were made yesterday. Whatever is going to be happening in South Africa, and indeed in Africa, in the next 10, 20, 30 years depends on what is being done today. What you have not contributed to is not going to happen in your favor. If you don't stand up, nobody's going to see you. And if you don't speak out, nobody is going to hear you.
Yeah.
So get involved. Finally, not only to South Africans, but to all Africans, please know that your freedom is not isolated to you. Let us remember the words of Kwame Nkrumah, that Africa cannot be free unless all of Africa is free. And the world cannot be free. I mean, you cannot be free unless the rest of the world is free. While you look at the plight of the people of South Africa, the black people of South Africa, look at the plight of the people of Congo, look at the plight of the people of Sudan, the people of Gaza, the people of Ukraine, and all over the world. Let us stand for humanity.
Yes.
Wherever.
I need to squeeze one in. What's next for Bobi Wine?
What's next for Bobi Wine? Trying to stay alive is my most important goal. Then the rest will be a bonus.
It's been an absolute pleasure having you in studio. And thank you so much for speaking to us. An absolute pleasure. That there, Mr. Robert Kyagulanyi. Sentamu, yes, known of course affectionately as Bobi Wine, speaking.
President Kyagulanyi Sentamu Robert Bobi Wine ebigamba byogedde bulungi era bituusiza bulungi ku nteekateeka ez'okuggyako Nakyemalira Eno Museveni n'engeri gy'atulugunyaamu abannansi, gy'abattamu, gy'abayisaamu watali musango wabula ng'afa kimu kwenywereza ku ntebe. Abannansi bafuba okumuggyako nga bakola bye basaanidde okukola, naye afuba okwenyerezaako ng'abatemula, abatta, abatulugunya, abajjamu amannya, abajjamu embiriizi, abajjamu amaaso, abakolako ebikolobero ebitagwanidde, ebitasaanidde kukolebwa muntu. Kati nno tulina kufungiza ffenna kuba ekizibu ekiri mu Uganda, kiri Kenya, kiri Tanzania, kiri mu mawanga ag'enjawulo, era nga ne South Africa nayo wadde eriweeri nira mukyalimu ebirumira. Nolwekyo tulina okutereeza Africa nga abakulembeze abo abasuubira nti be balina bokka okukyusa Africa, nti bo watali Africa teriiwo nga tubajje mu bifo ebyo. Kubanga abeeteekako self-entitlement, beeteekako nti bo batali tewalisoboka kuba. Kati nosooka okubajjawo, then tuteekawo abakulembeze abamanyi nti nno waliwo esoboka okukolebwa, Africa okugenda maaso era buli omu okujeyagalira era buli omu okuba mu Uganda empya Africa empya ye sawa okubanga abaana ba Africa fena tusituka abavubuka kubanga bino ebiriwo byakolebwa bajjajjaffe naffe tunobaako kyetukola ekigenda okuyamba ensi yaffe okujjako bannakyemalira ne Fugabbi. Mbagala nnyo mwenna Omukama Katonda gwe nsaba bakuume tujja kuba tuddamu banange mweraba.